Guys. Okay, we're here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage South Carolina Attorney General Alan Wilson. Help me welcome him, everybody.
Thank you very much. How's everyone doing? I can't hear you. Can you count this out the room? Sit down. Good to see you. First off, thank you all for being here. What an amazing night. What an amazing week it's been for Carly Fiorina. What do you say? I can't tell you how incredibly proud I am to be up here and have the opportunity. It's an opportunity of a lifetime to be able to moderate panels for the Conservative Leadership Project, a project totally committed to educating constituencies and citizens of South Carolina on some of the most important issues that sadly don't get the attention that they deserve. What a lot of people don't think about or don't realize is that 4 of the 9 U.S. Supreme Court justices were born in the 1930s. And in the first term of the next president of the United States, we will have 4 people that the next president could possibly appoint to the High Court, and that could be a 25, 35, 45-year imprint or footprint on this country. And so this is a very important time. The purpose of the Conservative Leadership Project is to basically educate the citizens on the views of the candidates and how they articulate their judicial philosophy and how they believe the role of the federal government and the role of the state government should interface with one another. Real quickly, before I invite her to come out here, and I know that's why you're here, I've often used a very cheesy analogy, and I've done this 1,000 times, but when I was a kid, I saw a cheesy movie called Blob. Y'all remember Blob? And the Blob was about a little alien ball of jelly the size of a lemon that comes from outer space, and for the whole movie, it rolls around eating things and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It consumes and consumes. And by the end of the movie, it's the size of what? A diner, right? And the remaining townspeople are in the diner with Steve McQueen. For those over 40 who know who Steve McQueen is. And Steve McQueen is trying to beat back the Blob because the Blob is just consuming to no end. It doesn't know when to stop. Well, at the very end of the movie, Steve McQueen figures out that if you freeze the Blob, you can't blow it up, chop it up, cut it up, burn it up. You can freeze it. And at the very end of the movie, they drop the Blob in the Arctic Ocean. They freeze it and they drop it in the Arctic Ocean so it'll quit eating and growing. Now, the Constitution doesn't let us drop Congress in the Arctic Ocean. I'm working on that, by the way. But the Constitution gives us the tools to put elected leaders in a place where they can have an extremely powerful impact so that they can be the Steve McQueen of our time and freeze the growing blob that is the federal government. And that's what we're here to do today, to talk about how we can freeze the blob and how we can stop the federal government from performing functions and going in places it was never intended to go. So with this, thank you. Real quick, before we invite her to come out here, I would like to thank the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber, Jim Creel, who you saw earlier, who's chairman of the board, the Grand Strand Business Alliance, for their partnership in helping put this event together. Obviously, you can see on the backdrop the Crown Reef Resort. We appreciate all the folks who partnered together to give you this venue to hear Ms. Fiorina come out in just a moment. We have a number of elected officials here and appointed officials. If you were an elected official, would you just please stand so that you can at least be recognized by the folks around you? Or if you're in the back room, raise your hand. Elected officials, stand up. I was going to call him by name, but when you start doing the name game, you know what happens. So, all right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time. All right. When she walks out, I want you to hurt her ears. Okay? And you guys are great. South Carolina is going to welcome a presidential candidate that I think she's been saying for the last month she's trying to introduce herself to the American people. I don't think she needs an introduction anymore, at least to this group. So at this time, I'm going to ask if Mrs. Carly Fiorina will come out and be greeted. go ahead and, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a very casual conversation. It's not going to be like we're in college and you're getting lectured. We're not going to speak at you. We're going to basically speak with you. But what I would like to do is, Carly, if you would just go ahead and kick off and just introduce yourself now that you need it to this room.
I want to talk to you about two people that have been very important in my life. One was my mother, who taught me when I was a little girl, what you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God. And my father. I learned conservatism at my father's knee, literally. I would watch the news every night with my dad, not because I cared about the news, but because I liked to sit by my dad's knees. And I would watch him yell at Walter Cronkite, and then he would explain why. And the next morning over breakfast, he would yell at the New York Times and he would explain why. Of course, in my life today, my husband Frank of over 30 years, our daughter Tracy, son-in-law Lowell, we lost our younger daughter, as you may know, Lori. We have 2 granddaughters, and now the world maybe knows I also have 2 dogs, Max and Snickers. Max is feeling very left out, I must tell you, his verse didn't get sung. But I start with my mother and father because I think they taught me core principles upon which this nation is founded and about which we are going to speak today. So what did my mother teach me? That everyone has gifts. That everyone has potential. And in truth, I've learned that everyone all over the world has gifts, everyone has potential, usually more than they realize. But this nation, unlike any other, was built on this core idea of individual liberty because our founders thought that everyone should have the right to find and use their God-given gifts to fulfill their potential. The right. And they said that right to fulfill your potential, to find and use your God-given gifts, to discover the possibilities that could be in each life. They said that right came from God, as my mother taught me, and cannot be taken away by man or government. And my dad, who later went on, he was a law professor for much of his career, but he went on to become maybe the lone conservative jurist on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. One of the most liberal courts in the land, and I watched him stick to his principles, stick to the core tenets of this nation and of our Constitution against enormous pressure. And so I had the opportunity to see what standing up for principle under pressure looks like. And I'm eternally grateful to both my mother and father for those 2 important lessons.
Up my first question when you were in the back hallway. You might have heard me talk about the Supreme Court and how important that imprint is on our country. And you may have heard me say that 4 of our Supreme Court justices were born in the 1930s. And in the first term of the next president of the United States, we'll have 4 80-something-year-olds on the court. Not that 80-something-year-olds can't be on the court, but if you look at the averages, the average age of the former justices when they retire, they all retire in their early 80s. So my question to you is, and the question to the folks out here, because the next president could select nearly half of the members of the court, potentially within their first term. What type of individuals are you looking to appoint as president of the United States?
So there are simple answers, and then there are slightly more profound answers. So let me start with the simple ones. The simple truth is I would look for men or women who were like my father, because I saw what a conservative jurist, a strict constructionist looks like and sounds like and acts like. It's easy to say that I would look for people who understand what the Constitution says and stick to it, as opposed to turning it into what they want it to say. I also, however, before I would nominate anyone to serve on the Supreme Court, and you're right, this is a huge and important power that the president has, and we have seen that people, as they ascend to the Supreme Court sometimes turn out to be different than we thought they were. And so one of the things that I would do, instead of passing off the job to interview a nominee or a potential nominee at great length to say my general counsel or someone on my staff, I would want to spend a great deal of time with anyone before I nominated them. And one of the things that I would ask is not just to see their opinions, to see the track record that they have, if there is one, but I would also ask them to describe to me occasions in their life where they were under pressure to compromise their principles. And what did they do? Because I think the truth is, many Supreme Court justices who have principles get into that position, and like all human beings, they succumb to pressure. Peer pressure from other judges, the pressure of the media, the pressure of the political process. And so it's important to know, can somebody stand up
It seems
to
to be
pressure?
absolutely, it's both the campaign and the candidate herself
Finally,
who's been coming
I
out
would
with
want to
legal
know a great
policies,
deal
understated
about
claims of
what
Donald
they
Trump. We heard that
thought
at the event earlier today in South
about the
Carolina.
Ninth
Doing
Amendment,
kind of an off-the-cuff remark,
the
and my
10th
phone's not
Amendment,
working, that
and the
unlike some
immunity and privileges
caricatures,
clause of the
as she
14th
told
Amendment. Because taken together, those three sections of our Constitution basically say that individual rights are protected from the overreach of government, that states' rights and I think, as many of our great scholars in the conservative movement are now noting, I think that we've sort of gotten to a place where maybe we think the core principle, the core tenet, the core value of our democracy is majority rules. But in fact, the core tenet of our democracy is individual liberty. And the reason that's so important, all the way back to my mother and potential and God-given gifts, the reason that's so important is because I think we have come to a pivotal time, truly, in our nation's history. It is why I am running for president, where the potential of too many Americans, the potential of this nation, is being crushed, literally, by the weight, the power, the cost, the complexity, the ineptitude, and the corruption of government. And we must...
You're good at this. You just answer the next three questions. This section of this line of questions is under the heading of judicial philosophy. I didn't say that when we started, but this is for judicial philosophy, and I was going to ask, how does your judicial philosophy, or how would it influence your vetting and the decisions you would make as to members of the high court, low courts, and other appointments in government? And you answered that. I would also like to ask, Carly and I were in the back room talking earlier, and I didn't want to play gotcha questions with her, so I'll say, listen, I'm going to ask you about important Supreme Court decisions that you may have vehemently disagreed with. And I wasn't going to put anything in her head, but I said, I don't want you to feel like you have to give a specific name, because there's a lot of cases out there, but I don't want you to feel like I'm trying to do a gotcha game with you. So she says, well, there is one case I want to talk about, and she goes, it was Hewlett versus City of New London, and my mouth dropped, and I opened up my notes, and I said, that was the case that I was thinking of because that's the case involving private property rights and eminent domain, if I remember from 2005. It's a very important case. So she was ready to talk about a case that I'd already written in hand. She didn't know I was going to say it. So this is your chance to talk about that case and other cases that you think are notable.
Well, of course, we all, I certainly believe, the Supreme Court overstepped its authority hugely and interpreted the Constitution as opposed to following the Constitution when they reaffirmed Obamacare twice, and when the Supreme Court decided what the definition of marriage should be. But I think as well, Kelo is a very important Because at the heart of the Kelo case is whether or not individual liberty will be protected against an alliance of business and government. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And in the case of Suzette Kelo, a woman with a beautiful home that she clearly cared deeply about. If you've ever seen pictures of her home, ladies, it was adorable. It was this pink home, flowers, a gorgeous home. A woman obviously had great pride in her home. And commercial interests in the city wanted her property because the commercial interests wanted to build, the city wanted revenue, and so she didn't want to sell. She didn't think they were giving them the right price. You know, that is how markets work, right? You're supposed to give a price that will cause someone to say, yes, I'm prepared to give up my property. Well, so they declared her property blighted and took it over. Or I could tell you the story of Vera Koking. Vera Koking lived in Atlantic City, New Jersey. In this case, the business interest was Donald Trump's casinos. Donald Trump's casinos and the city of Atlantic City decided that they wanted a parking lot for limousines, and they took over Vera Koking's home. This is the core of what 9th, 10th, Privileges and Immunities Clause in the 14th Amendment is about. How much liberty and power does an individual have against the state? And one of the things that's going on in this country today is we have an unholy alliance between business interests and political interests and the lobbyists that serve both, and they all get together and the individual becomes very small as government becomes very big and powerful. There are many who would say that this is a case in which judges on the Supreme Court should have been engaged and said this is a violation. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court did not find in the interests of Suzette Kelo. So this is why I think this is one of the core things at stake now going forward. When government gets too big and too powerful, individual citizens in this nation become too small. And this nation was built on the principle of citizen government and built on the principle that every life, every individual has value and power in this society.
Carly, the next line of questions, we're going to a different area, and the next area I'm going to go into questioning is an area talking about executive action, or as I call the phone and pen section. And so the next area of questions are going to be involving executive action. Now, we're going to have a question later on immigration, so this isn't about immigration, but I'll give you some examples. Y'all all recall that South Carolina joined Texas, Governor Abbott in Texas. Last November, we joined him in his fight against the president's overreach on his immigration decision to basically legalize 5 million legal immigrants. We thought that was a violation of the Take Care Clause of the Constitution, as well as several other provisions of the U.S. Constitution. The President said that last November, I just took action to change the law. A phrase that the White House later clarified as being colloquial in nature. That's a really powerful statement to me. Another area that we want to talk about, this is important to South Carolina, is that over 30 years, multiple Congresses in a bipartisan fashion spent billions of dollars on Yucca Mountain to be the nuclear repository for all the nuclear waste in the country. And several years ago, in the first term of President Obama, he unilaterally, through the Department of Energy fiat, overturned 30 years of funding, 30 years of bipartisan agreements and resolutions to make Yucca Mountain the nuclear repository. Whether that was a good idea or bad idea is irrelevant. The fact is, he unilaterally did it. My question is this: do you believe federal administrative agencies are required to operate based on congressional or executive action when the two are in conflict?
So one of the things that I will be very candid in saying, I've been disappointed in is the majority, the Republican majority in the House and the Republican majority in the Senate. And I say that in direct response to this question because, you know, a lot of us worked hard. I'm sure you did. I did. A lot of us worked hard to return historic majorities to the House and to elect a majority in the Senate. Not a lot has changed. It's one of the reasons why 82% of the American people think we have a professional political class of both parties who are more concerned with the protection of their power, privilege, and position than of getting the work done. That too is why I'm running for president. I think it's time to go back to a citizen government. But why do I bring this up in the context of this specific question? Because one of the things this Congress could do is pass something called the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S. And what the REINS Act would do is solve a lot of these conflicts. It is fair to say that not only has this president acted with executive orders in an incredibly lawless and unconstitutional way, but the regulatory authority of this administration has become the governing authority. So whether it's the EPA or the creation of, I mean, the EPA is basically destroying the coal industry. They now control about 99% of the groundwater in this nation. I spent 12 years in California. I can tell you what happens when the EPA controls your water. Devastation of agriculture and other industries. So the EPA is rolling out regulation after regulation. This administration has created this thing called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is one of the largest bureaucracies in Washington. By statute, it has no oversight from Congress. Imagine that. And these are a bunch of nameless, faceless bureaucrats elected by no one, accountable to no one, and they are siphoning up 700 million records, credit records, mortgage applications, all this personal information, no oversight at all. So what the REINS Act would do is say, you know what? Every regulation that's promulgated by the executive branch must be examined, looked at, approved, if it has an impact over a certain amount of money, which is fairly low, by the congressional branch. Boy, wouldn't that be great? So in other words, leadership, pass the REINS Act. If President Obama wants to veto it, so be it. But let's at least have the fight. So the president has to explain to the American people why he doesn't want congressional oversight.
Momentarily, or a few moments ago, about immigration, and we're going to ask a question on immigration, and he's doing it under the guise of prosecutorial discretion. Now, I see former Solicitor and current Senator Greg Embry. I think I saw Solicitor Scarlett Wilson in here somewhere over here. And as a prosecutor, as a former prosecutor and prosecutors, we know what prosecutorial discretion is and is not. That is not prosecutorial discretion. That is abdicating your responsibility to law and the Constitution. What would you do to solve or to at least address the illegal immigration problem we have in the United States if you were to become president?
So let me just say first, Alan and I were chatting about this a little bit earlier today. You know, attorneys general, this is one piece of good news about the Obama administration. The attorneys general, nobody used to really understand what they did. Now all of a sudden, everybody says, oh my gosh, we need attorneys general and solicitors general to sue the government. So that's one way to get people fired up about what you do.
You need an attorney general, I'll talk to you.
So let's say a couple things. How long have we been talking about immigration in this country? Forever. with all due respect to Mr. Trump, he is not the first person to bring this issue up. We talked about it in 2012, we talked about it in 2008, we talked about it in 2004, we talked about it in the year 2000. In fact, we have been talking about it for 25 years, and yet our border has remained insecure for 25 years. San Francisco has been a sanctuary city since 1989, and there are 300 of them. The legal immigration system has been a shambles for 25 years. What does that mean? It means we have 16 different visa programs, we don't have an employer verification system that works, therefore we can't make it mandatory for employers. Half the people here illegally came on a legal visa, just decided not to go home, nobody did anything about it. We let the wrong people go home, we take the wrong people in, it's a mess. And we have been arguing about this politically for 25 years. So, here's what needs to happen. Instead of talking about it, we need a leader who actually understands that talk is not results. What does it take to secure a border? Money, manpower, technology, fences and walls in some places. But mostly, apparently, what it takes is political willpower, because money, manpower, technology, and fences are not rocket science, ladies and gentlemen, but apparently it's a little too politically hot for anybody to get it done. So let's go get that done and restore people's faith in the fundamental competence of their government, because a government that cannot secure its border cannot protect its sovereignty. And yes, let's fix the legal immigration system. It's been broken for 25 years. We know how to do this. We just don't do it. But I want to point out one other thing. You know, on that debate stage last week, all of the Republican candidates, all of us, were having a serious conversation about how to solve this problem. Not everyone may agree with everyone else, but we were talking about how to solve it. We know how to solve it, as I point out, it's a question of doing it. But let me just offer this. The Democrats do not want this issue solved, and they never have. And you have to ask yourself why. President Obama is elected in 2008. He has a majority in the House. He has a majority in the Senate. He can pass anything he wants. In fact, he did. He passed Obamacare on a purely partisan basis. He passed Dodd Frank. He never touched immigration. And by the way, it was Democrats that sunk President Bush's comprehensive immigration reform bill. They don't want it solved because they want it as an issue to play with their identity politics. Democrats play identity politics. You're this identity, you care about this issue, they divide and conquer. In 2016, we cannot let them get away with that anymore, and I will not.
The next area I would like to go into is federalism and the 10th Amendment as it relates to the federal government. What is the state's role with the federal government? The 10th Amendment, before I talk about the 10th Amendment, the Constitution basically has, it's a handbook for how we should govern ourselves. And the Article 1 says, Congress, you can do all of these things. These are your powers. Article 2 says, executive branch, these are all your powers and duties. This is what you are allowed to do. And then Article 3 says, judiciary, these are your powers, these are your duties. This is what you're allowed to do. And then you go to the 10th Amendment of the Bill of Rights, and it says anything not listed on those three lists or prohibited by the Constitution to the states are left to the states. Period. How would the 10th Amendment, how would you apply the 10th Amendment, or how do you think judges should apply the 10th Amendment as it relates to federal overreaches?
So first, the 10th Amendment and the Constitution in general enumerates certain powers for the federal government. And one of the reasons 80+% of the American people have lost faith in the professional political class. One of the reasons 75% of the American people now think the government is corrupt, strong word, is because the government is doing all these things that they shouldn't be doing, and they're not doing well the things they're supposed to be doing. So it is the federal government's job, no one else's job, to secure the border. They are not doing it. It is the federal government's job to protect the nation. And yet, our military is not in the state of readiness it should be. Our men and women in uniform are not provided the respect, not to mention the support that they need. We have 300,000 plus veterans who died last year waiting for an appointment. So the federal government is failing to do the things it is responsible for doing. By the way, the federal government isn't fixing roads and bridges, also an enumerated power. And meanwhile, they're doing all these other things. So to me, the question is this: what is it that the federal government is supposed to be doing? And we are going to prioritize our efforts and our investments and our money to make sure that we do those things well. And everything else, if somebody else can do it, somebody else needs to do it, or it needs not to be done at all.
Right before we walk. Question: what state businesses imposed by overreaching agencies such as the EPA, the NLRB, etc.?
So the EPA, the NLRB, the FCC. You know, the FCC rolled out, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, 400 pages of regulation over the internet, passed on a purely partisan basis, 3-2 by a bunch of unelected commissioners. I said at the outset that I think we have come to a time and a place, a pivotal point in our nation's history where literally the potential of this nation is being crushed by the weight, the power, the cost, the complexity, the ineptitude of the federal government. And nowhere is this more true than when we look at what's going on in our economy with small businesses. So I started out as a secretary in a 9-person real estate firm. My husband, Frank, at 30 years, started out driving a tow truck for a family-owned auto body shop. Now, why do I tell you that? Because most Americans start that way. Most Americans start in little businesses, family-owned businesses or farms, community-based businesses. In fact, those small, family-owned, community-based businesses or new businesses create 2/3 of the new jobs in this country and employ half the people for the first time in U.S. history. We are destroying more of those businesses than we are creating. Think about that. So we are destroying the job creation engine of the nation. And meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, crony capitalism is alive and well. Because when you have a big, complicated, powerful government bureaucracy and a lot of lobbyists, guess what? Only the big, the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected can handle it. When I left Hewlett-Packard, I had led Hewlett-Packard for 6 years. When I left, the company was larger than any budget of any of the 50 states. We were over an 80, almost a $90 billion company. If I didn't like the regulatory thicket or the 73,000-page tax code, I could at least hire accountants and lawyers and lobbyists. The 9-person real estate firm, they can't. Every time a new regulation is passed, or even a new law is passed, it disadvantages the small, the powerless, the weak. Dodd Frank, what's the consequence of Dodd Frank? 10 Wall Street banks, too big to fail, have become 5, even bigger, more powerful banks. Thousands of community banks are being driven out of business. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is making it more and more and more difficult for community banks and small banks to give loans to regular folks or to small businesses. And so if we don't lift this crushing weight off the back of small businesses, which means 73,000-page tax code has to get to be about 3, so you don't need an accountant or a lawyer or a lobbyist to read it for you. You can understand it. By the way, if you have a 3-page tax code, you don't need a lot of IRS agents, do you? It's not just about reduce the deficit, you know this, cut spending, grow the economy, cut spending, grow the economy. If we cut spending the right way, we help grow the economy. It's not just about that, though that's incredibly important. It's not just about creating more jobs, although that's incredibly important. It's about leveling the playing field. As long as government is big, powerful, costly, complex, the wealthy, the powerful, the well-connected, and the big do great. And the small and the powerless get crushed. And that is what's happening in our economy today.
I need you to quit looking at my book because you're answering all my questions before I ask them. The next area I'd like to talk about is the EPA. Now, for those of you who don't know what the EPA stands for, as folks in my office say, it stands for the Eliminate Prosperity Agency. We in the Attorney General's Office have filed several dozen lawsuits or joined in lawsuits against the EPA with other states because of the job-killing regulations that are pouring out of this mammoth, this behemoth agency that basically seeks to rule through administrative fiat. One such regulation, Harley, is waters in the U.S. Anybody here have a ditch running through your property that might occasionally have water in it? Well, if they get that passed, you may have to get a federal permit to be able to build your property or to treat your property how you want. That's the kind of regulation that's coming out of the EPA. 111D, when they couldn't pass the greenhouse gas emission standards and pass other laws such as cap and trade, they quit going to the legislative route, which is the people's representatives, and they went to the regulatory route, to the elected bureaucrat lane. And that's where they try to legislate the regulation, as Ms. Fiorina just mentioned earlier. My question here. The EPA has passed a number of rules and regulations recently which will drastically drive up the cost of energy and various products for consumers here in South Carolina. How would you balance the need to protect the livable environment with the reality of the cost of those regulations on businesses?
Well, first, frankly, I think all those regulations that were rolled out by the EPA occurred inappropriately. I roll them all back. And the reason that's important. The reason that's important is because the justification, let's talk about the justification for a moment. The justification for this overreach, this incredible enormous overreach on the part of the EPA, is the science of climate change. Okay? So one of the things I like to say to my friends in the Democrat Party, or perhaps my opponents in the Democrat Party, and some members of the media, is, have you read the small print of the science? Because if you read the small print of the science, what you'll find is all of those scientists who tell us that global warming, climate change is real and that man is contributing to it, what they will also tell you is a single nation acting alone can make no difference at all. So, what we are doing is we have an administration and a party that is telling people we must do this for science. But what they're really doing is sacrificing other people's livelihoods and impacting other people's lives at the altar, not of science, but of ideology. This is all about ideology. So does it make any sense at all to drive up everyone's energy costs for no impact at all? Does it make any sense at all to devastate an industry? I have been in coal mining country, in West Virginia, in Kentucky. I have seen the devastation in these communities. Do you know what 40% unemployment looks like? Devastation, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. Communities fall apart. I have seen the devastation in a place like Mendota, California, in the Central Valley of California, where the federal government now controls the water. And these farmers don't have enough water to save their farms. And literally, we have movements going on in New York City saying, buy tomatoes from Colombia so that we protect the water and the fish. Honestly, I find it really interesting. And this is an example. I digress for a moment, don't forgive me. I said at the debate that what we're talking about right now at this pivotal point is a discussion about the defense of the security of our nation, but it's also the defense of the character of our nation. Honestly, how is it that the EPA, Democrats in Congress, spend so much time and energy talking about the need to protect fish, flies, frogs, and yet today they block passage of the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, and they continue to defend Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not butcher babies in this country. That is not what we are. So, what's happening? You have liberals who are prepared to destroy other people's lives and livelihoods at the altar of their ideology. It does no good at all. Here's what we have to do. Here's what we must do. Here's what I will do. A President Fiorina will say, we must be, this country must become the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century. We can do it, we should do it, we will do it. And that's important for a whole set of reasons. It's important because of energy costs. Energy powers the world and lifts millions, billions of people out of poverty. It's important because it creates jobs. It's important as well because if we are the global energy powerhouse of the 21st century, the bad guys don't have so much power, which is really important. And finally, it's critically important because what is always the answer to an intractable problem? What's the answer to an intractable problem always? Innovation, ladies and gentlemen. Not regulation, innovation. We have to have industries strong enough to innovate, and we are destroying industry so they cannot innovate.
The next question I want to go to addresses ObamaCare. Now, I've been involved in your vote, the first one that for the first time unified all the states' attorneys, 27 states were involved in that first lawsuit. And before Obamacare was passed, all the state attorneys generals were in their own respective states, minding their own business, doing their own thing. It was the first time in the history of our country that a majority of states came together to challenge an overreach like that. By the way, consequently, the following election cycle, for the first time in the history of the nation, we had a majority of Republican attorneys general because of that. Just about predictions in Rule 5.4 twice to uphold the constitutionality of Obamacare. Would you work to repeal Obamacare, which I think you just said you would? And if so, what would you replace it with?
So we have to repeal Obamacare. And you know why, but let me explain, not because you don't understand it, but because one of the things that we have to do, I believe, honestly, in 2016, to win in 2016, and we must win, is we have to explain our values and our principles to the American people so that they understand why we believe what we believe and why it is better for most everyone. The reason we have to repeal Obamacare is because it is a crony capitalist's dream. This bill was written by drug companies and insurance companies who are now consolidating. The bill itself was longer than a Harry Potter novel. Not really very interesting, so nobody read it. And then another 30 to 40,000 pages of regulation got written somewhere in the basement of HHS, and nobody's read that either. And so meanwhile now, the insurance companies, the hospitals, they're all consolidating to deal with big, complicated, powerful government. Meantime, the law is failing the people it was supposedly intended to serve. Emergency room visits are up over 50% in some places. Health insurance premiums are up over 40%. We're throwing more people into Medicaid, a program that is increasingly financially insolvent, and more than that, fewer and fewer doctors are accepting Medicaid. So we're not helping people. We must repeal it, both to help people and to stop the spread of crony capitalism in our health industry. Second, Here's a great example of what the federal government shouldn't be doing and the states should be doing. I think we need to give the responsibility to the states to manage high-risk pools. Many states did this well before Obamacare. The closer you put decision-making to the people affected by those decisions, the more accountable those decisions are. Push that responsibility to the states and the funding as well. Third, let's try the one thing we never tried in health insurance. What have we never tried? The free market. In fact, health insurance has been a cozy little game between regulators and health insurance companies for 100 years. We used to play it on the state level. And so regulators and health insurance companies would get together in a state like South Carolina or California or Texas, and the regulators and the health insurance companies would say, well, 4 of you get to play. This market's pretty small, only 4 of you can compete. What does that do? It removes choice and power and competition from the consumer. So and all Obamacare did really was nationalize that game. So now we have a cozy little game being played by regulators and health insurance companies on the national level. Who's not getting served? Any of us. So, let's go to the free market, truly, real competition, where you get to say, this is what I want, this is what I'm willing to pay for, this is the kind of coverage I need, and companies will compete for you, finally. And this is very important, and I don't use the term mandate in association with the federal government very often, but I am going to use it in this context. The federal government should mandate that every healthcare provider, hospital, walk-in clinic, senior citizens, every healthcare provider must publish on a regular basis their costs, their prices, their outcomes. Healthcare is a really important thing. I'm a breast cancer survivor. I know how important it is. Yes. I know how important it is that people get care. I know how important it is that people get help when they need help. But I also know that healthcare is so important to each of us and our families, we don't have any idea. We don't know whether this hospital is better than that hospital. We don't know what their outcomes are versus those outcomes. We don't know what the prices are. It is a big black box. And the government has been reimbursing healthcare providers on the basis of their costs for years. So what does that do? You have no incentive to get better at anything. You need to know. I need to know. We all need to know. What are your costs? What are your prices? What are your outcomes? So that you're in charge, not them.
You've been doing so well answering so many questions. We've invited several questions. The next question that came from the audience has come from Alan Clemens, who's a local representative from House District 107, which is this House District. This is more of a foreign policy question, so we're going to go off the reservation just for a moment. And the question, and it's a long question. Don't let a lawyer write a question. The Obama administration has applied unprecedented pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government to divide Jerusalem and divorce the nation from Judea and Samaria. Question: as President of the United States, what will be your policy with regard to Israel's self-determination relative to the division of Jerusalem and disposition of Judea and Samaria? And, it's a long question, how will you work to repair the relationship between the White House and Israel?
First, Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and it should be where our embassy is. Second, on day 1 in the Oval Office, I will make 2 phone calls. The first will be to my good friend Bibi Netanyahu, to reassure him we will stand with the state of Israel always. Will be to the Supreme Leader of Iran. He might not take my phone call. He will get the message. The message is New Deal. The New Deal is this: until you open every military facility and every nuclear facility to real, anytime, anywhere inspections by our people, not yours, we, the United States of America, will make it as difficult as possible for you to move money around the global financial system. We can do that. I am prepared to say to any bank that does business in Iran, you will not do business in the United States of America. We can do this. We must do it. This deal has put the entire region at risk, not just Israel. And the reason those two phone calls must be made on day one, and I will make sure the entire world knows I have made those phone calls, is because it sends a signal to every ally we have, because even our allies who do not agree with the state of Israel look at how we are treating Israel and wonder what their friendship with us means. Every ally in this world and every adversary in this world as well will get the message loud and clear. The United States of America is back in the leadership business. We will stand with our allies. We will confront our adversaries.
All right, we're about to go into the lightning round because I'm cognizant that we've got to stay on time. Dodd Frank does to the financial industry what Obamacare did to the health insurance and healthcare industry. Centralized power and an unelected federal government that rules through administrative fiat. It is choking out capital on Main Street so that the big guys on Wall Street can have it, and it's making lines of credit harder to get. How would you make lines of credit easier to get for young couples buying a home, or a person starting a small business, or a student getting a student loan? How would you free up that capital? How would you handle the Dodd Frank issue?
Well, first of all, Dodd Frank has to be repealed. It has to be repealed. When you get these incredibly complex combinations of legislation and regulation around which all these special interests have gathered, you cannot tinker around the edges of that. You cannot. And one of the things that Dodd Frank did is increase capital requirements. That's why so many community banks are going out of business. They can't meet the capital requirements. That's great for Wall Street. They got less competition. It's terrible for Main Street. So we have to repeal it. I think it's really important to understand that competition serves consumers. The more competition you have, the more power the individual consumer has. The less competition you have, the more power the big, the powerful, and wealthy have. Think about it. And again, this is one of those things I think we have to explain to the American people, because we have somebody running on the Democrat Party side, maybe a couple somebody, but Bernie Sanders runs around and talks about crony capitalism, and everybody cheers. I get a lot of people, I get a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters who come to my rallies. The problem is Bernie Sanders, maybe because he doesn't understand the economy, maybe that's Hillary's problem, maybe because he's a socialist, his solutions make crony capitalism worse, not better. You keep growing government, crony capitalism gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So, this is why simplification, taking power out of Washington, simplifying everything is so important. Because until and unless we do that, the small, whatever it is, the small business, the small family, whoever it is, if you're not big, powerful, wealthy, and well-connected, you are getting harmed by a powerful, complicated government.
I'll try to ask her to do the impossible, give 1-minute answers on very complex questions, and she's been very good at that. National Labor Relations Board. Several years ago, a small startup that no one ever heard of called Boeing. Thank you for that. Didn't relocate, tried to expand their manufacturing operation to North Charleston, South Carolina. They didn't remove jobs anywhere else. They merely tried to make a private business decision. If you
Growing jobs, what a concept.
I know. They created jobs on the way in the state they left to expand to South Carolina as well. Had you been president, how would you have handled that? Had you had an NLRB that was basically prosecuting that private business decision?
Well, I might have gotten new appointees to the NLRB, first of all, and thank goodness your governor stood up and prevented that from happening. But let's remember the NLRB today, what are they doing? They are changing the rules for franchisees and franchises as we speak. Why? Because they have a special interest group called organized labor that sees its membership declining and is looking for new places to organize, and so they want to go into franchises and franchisees. We now have, this is not an exaggeration, ladies and gentlemen, we have a set of 5 people, and actually only 3 of them agree, so all of these decisions are 3-2. We have a set of partisan, unelected, unaccountable, appointed bureaucrats who have decided that it is within their purview to change the definition of a franchise-franchisee relationship that has built jobs and economies and created small business owners in this country for 100 years. Really, who gave you that power? This is what I mean when I say we have to take our government back.
Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep their arms shall not be infringed. The fact that shall not be infringed was written last presupposes that the right didn't come from the government, that it exists prior to the government. My question to you is, do you believe that the Second Amendment bestows individual rights or the rights of the militia?
Individual rights, period.
Religious liberty. Now, we've all watched the Kim Davis situation in Kentucky. We've also, some of you may have heard about a cake baker in Colorado and wedding planners. There's a great concern that the recent Supreme Court decision may have intended or unintended consequences as to people's practice of their personal religious beliefs. How do you view the public square? Do you think religion has an appropriate place in government and the public square? Do you think accommodation should be made for people who don't want to violate their personal convictions?
Of course, but let me expand. We have a national RFRA. We now are in the process, state by state, of passing RFRA, and we should. I was one of the very few people who stood up and supported Indiana. It's clear that states are violating people's religious liberty, even as the national government has. We need to pass these laws. RFRA is not ever intended to be a vehicle of discrimination, as some on the left have claimed. RFRA is a vehicle, it is for protection. The right to practice our religion as we see fit, the right to conscience, is as core a value and an individual liberty as exists in this nation. Religious liberty must be protected at all costs. I'll also just say this. I think people of faith make better leaders. I think faith, I know in my own case, in my family's case, I have been saved by a personal relationship with Jesus Christ through difficult times. But whatever someone's faith, if it is sincere, people of faith make better leaders because our faith gives us what? Humility. We know there is something larger than ourselves. Our faith gives us empathy. We know that no one of us is any better than any other one of us, that any one of us can fall, that every one of us can be redeemed, and faith also gives us optimism. And without optimism, nothing can be changed for the better. And I also think we need more prayer, not less prayer. Not to force someone to pray to a God that they do not believe in. But what is prayer? Prayer is a moment of stillness in a very frenetic world. It is a moment of contemplation in a very superficial world. It is a time when we can bow our heads and remember that it is not all about us. And I think we need that.
Bringing out the shepherd's hook. Saw him do this at the back. My last question is important to me. We've all seen a lot of news stories of tragedies involving law enforcement and members of people. And no one disputes that there are bad actors in every demographic, in every group, including law enforcement. But as a prosecutor, I've seen the badge unfairly tarnished. A lot of men and women put themselves out there every single day, walking to the window of a car, not knowing if they're going to be greeted with a driver's license and registration or a shotgun. I've seen them castigated. I've seen them insulted. I've just seen the badge get tarnished. It causes me personal grief because I know the men and women are out there doing that. My question is this, and I'm consolidating two questions into one. First, what would you do as president to increase public confidence in law enforcement, and how would you work to support state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies as president of the United States?
You know, in many important areas, tone starts at the top. And the president has a great opportunity to communicate to the nation what is important. When President Obama brings to the White House a young boy whose school clearly overreacted when he was building a clock, but never brings to the White House the family of an officer assassinated merely for being a That says it all, right? That says it all. So I will start by respecting, by honoring, by lifting up those brave men and women who serve us abroad and who serve us at home, because we need their service and we should thank them every day.
And you can, maybe as we walk out, you can ask the question, but I do have to keep her on schedule. First, I want to say thank you to the Crown Reef Resort. I want to thank the Myrtle Beach Area Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank the Grand Strand Alliance. I want to thank all the volunteers. You see a lot of young people who came through high school and college students. Who is executive director, and I want to thank her staff for helping put this together with our partners. And I want to thank you, Carly, for taking time to come here to meet with the citizens of our state and this community to talk about issues. By show of hands, how many people thought this was informative and educational? Good. I also want to thank you. Somebody was walking in and I was shaking hands and he said, "Let me know what I can do to help you." And I'm like, "You're helping me right now, Dr. Because you have to care, you have to show up. You could have been home sitting on the couch, but you chose to be here. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here to hear Carly talk about her vision for America, to talk about what she's going to do for this country, for this state, for this community, and for your families. That is so important. That's what the Conservative Leadership Project is about, is promoting these ideas and open exchange of ideas so that you can be educated and informed. If you want to see this, it's going to be rebroadcast on the Conservative Leadership Forum's website, clpforums.com, and there will be more of these coming around the state. But the point is if you want to know more about the CLP, please go to the website and watch Ms. Fiorina's interview again, and make sure you make an informed decision come next February. Again, I want to thank everyone in this room for how hospitable and wonderful you've been as a community of people to welcome her here after an amazing debate performance last week. Congratulations.
so much, Alan. It was a pleasure to be up here with you, having a great conversation, and thank all of you for being here and for your very warm welcome. I've had a wonderful day in South Carolina this morning. I was at the Citadel talking with so many of your fellow South Carolinians about the challenges that we face around the world, and this afternoon to have a wonderful conversation about our Constitution. You know, there are people out there who will say, well, you know, the Constitution, I mean, it was written hundreds of years ago, and what does it have to do with us? And of course, we know that some wisdom is timeless. I said a few moments ago that I do think that 2016 is going to be a fight for the character of our nation, for the future of our nation, for the role of our government, and for individual liberty and the opportunity for every American to actually fulfill their potential. And I think one of the things that we must do is reintroduce who we are and what we believe to be American people. That's why I go on places like The View. I talk to all kinds of people. That's why I talk to Katie Couric for 45 minutes a day. I launch my campaign. It's actually important to talk to people who may not yet know they agree with us. And I got asked a really interesting question on The View. I was having a great time with the ladies of The View, and I actually was talking with one of their hosts about Vladimir Putin, the man I met, and she was fascinated by that. And at a certain point, I think she was sort of surprised. She liked me, and we were getting along. And so she asked the key question, why are you a conservative? And so my answer was this, because I know that no one of us is any better than any other one of us. Every one of us has God-given gifts. Every one of us can live a life of dignity and purpose and meaning, and I know that our values, our principles, and our policies work better to lift people up. I look forward to having that conversation with all Americans, because I think that is what it is going to take to win this election. And so I will leave you with this thought, and it's a bit what I talked about this morning, our role in the world, and what we talk about this evening, how we govern ourselves. I think every day about what this nation can be, must be, in the 21st century. For me, it's best summarized by thinking about Lady Liberty and Lady Justice. So picture Lady Liberty in your minds. She stands tall and strong, as America must always be. She is clear-eyed and resolute. She does not shield her eyes from the realities of the world. She calls the evil she sees in the world what it is. But she also faces out into the world, as we always must, because we are a unique nation on earth and only we can lead. And she holds her torch high, because she knows she is a beacon of hope in a very troubled, very dangerous world. And Lady Justice. Lady Justice holds a sword, because she's a fighter. She's a warrior for the values and the principles that have made this nation great. She holds a scale. And with that scale, she says, all of us are equal in the eyes of God, and so all of us must be equal in the eyes of the law and government, powerful and powerless alike. And she wears a blindfold. And with that blindfold, she says, I believe that it must be true, it can be true, that in this nation, in this century, it does not matter who you are. It does not matter what you look like. It does not matter how you started. It does not matter your circumstances. Here in this nation, every American's life must be filled with the possibilities that come from their God-given gifts. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless you.